should your child be in therapy? Should my child be in therapy? I have a lot of conversations with people around therapy and around children being in therapy and whether they should and whether they shouldn't. Sometimes people are worried that it's a risk, that it's going to work against them, that, the child's going to say they don't want to be with them, or the therapist is going to think that, the child shouldn't be with the parent, or whatever it is. I have a lot of people that have concerns around the therapy issue. And in reality, therapy can actually be a really useful thing in the moment that you're standing in front of the court a lot of times. Why would somebody disagree with their child being in therapy? And how does the court feel about the child being in therapy? Well, I will tell you that most of the time when people disagree with a child being in therapy, it's because they're worried about what the child is going to say. They're afraid it's going to count against them in some way or cause them to lose time or whatever. And if you're that parent and you're watching me, I'm going to tell you to get over it and put the child in therapy, because the fact that you're fighting putting the child in therapy alone is a red flag to the court most of the time. Courts kind of see this as who can't benefit from therapy. Now, I don't think all states just kind of rubber stamp therapy, but a lot of them do. And I can tell you in California, most judges feel like therapy's good. Therapy for the kid, therapy for the parents, family therapy, co-parenting counseling, whatever it is, we invoke therapy a lot in the family court system. Now, when children are a little bit older, it can get a little bit more challenging because obviously you can't drag a 16-year-old to therapy, right? You can't physically force them. So that is a point where really you have to kind of invoke your parental authority and say, look, you're going to lose the car, you're going to lose the phone, you're going to lose the internet, whatever it is that you need to take away in order to get them to cooperate with therapy. And a lot of times that's the only way you can do it. And, some states won't force a child into therapy beyond a certain age. So, you need to check your local state rules and all that around that kind of thing. But I think most of the time we're talking about kind of younger kids. And I think that, I see dads in particular that are resistant to putting the child in therapy because they are worried. They're worried that the child's been coached and all this kind of thing. I also see moms that have the same issue sometimes. Having your child in therapy, the benefit of it is it gives you a third party who can reflect what the child's actually feeling or what the child is, what their preferences are or whatever. Sure, that could come out of it. But really, I find in the first instance, that isn't the therapist's goal. Okay. The therapist's first goal is, how do I help this child? So let's take something as simple as the child doesn't want to transition, right? I had a client say this to me today. The other parent is saying the child doesn't want to go with me. Okay. First of all, let me just tell you, very normal thing for a child to say. If the child is saying that to you or the other parent is saying the child says that to them, whatever the case may be, it's a very normal thing. And it's not normally about going with the other parent. It's not normally a resistance to going with the other parent. I'm not saying it can't be in certain circumstances. I think it can be sometimes. But in the vast majority of cases, it's just a matter of that child not wanting to go through the emotional upheaval of transitioning between the two worlds. That's an unpleasant thing to have to make, that sort of emotional shift from mom's house to dad's house or dad's house to mom's house, whatever the case may be. And just going through that process is sort of emotionally exhausting for them, right? And they are at an age a lot of times where they haven't learned to manage those emotional upheavals. They haven't learned to self-soothe. They haven't learned a lot of the techniques that hopefully we've learned now as adults. And so it's more of a struggle with them. So them saying that is a very normal thing. No therapist is going to go, oh my goodness, the child doesn't want to go with one of the parents. They shouldn't have to go. Okay, that's not going to be the therapist's first reaction, or it shouldn't be anyway. Some therapists are more experienced than others and better than others, but hopefully if you're going to agree to therapy, you're going to vet, the options, and you're going to participate in the decision making of who it will be. But that's a very normal type of thing, that a child doesn't want to go. And what the therapist's goal is going to be in that instance is, when you're asking somebody to be the child's therapist, think of it like if you've ever gone into therapy yourself, and if you haven't and you're going through this process, I would encourage you to do that at least for 6 to 12 sessions or so, and just learn how that can help you and the tools it can give you and all that kind of stuff, to just have that other person to bounce off of, have a person that has experience that can give you some of the coping mechanisms and things. And then you'll start to understand why therapy for your child isn't really a threat. But for those of you who have had your own therapy, think about it from that perspective of like, you go in and what's the therapist's goal? If you say, oh, well, my boss is a jerk and my parents are jerks, or my ex is a jerk, or my current mate is a jerk, or whatever the thing is, the therapist doesn't always just go, oh, well, that person's a jerk, you need to get away from them. Like, that's not the default answer, right? Sometimes after we flesh that out for a while, that might ultimately be the answer in those types of adult relationships, but that's not going to be an option for a child at any point. In the first instance, what they will do is try to give you tools to cope with that, right? How do we manage that? How can we better communicate with this person? How can we word things in a way to where we get this person to understand how we feel? How can we, conduct ourselves in ways that avoid conflict and do all these things? So that's what the focus for the child is going to be in the first instance. It's going to be, how do we give the child tools to help them more easily make that transition and for it to be less traumatic and less emotional for them and all of those things. Now, if one parent is alienating or one parent is doing those types of things, that will generally come out in the process of this. And also, if you have a child that is saying they don't want to go, that's going to be seen as normal and all that. But if the other parent is coaching them and, getting them to say those kinds of things, again, a good therapist is going to know over time that, oh, this is presenting like a child that is coached, because there's characteristics that are there. There's things that you see. There's things that the child says. There's words they use that aren't normal child words for things. They're going to pick up on it. So really, if you're like, well, I'm afraid the other parent is coaching the child not to want to go with me, and if we put them in therapy, the child's going to tell the therapist that they don't want to go with me, and then I'm not going to get to see my child. Actually, the opposite is probably closer to the truth, because if the other parent is coaching the child that they should say they don't want to go with you, that therapist is more likely than not going to get to the bottom of the fact that the child, that's being planted in the child's head, and that's not something that's coming from the child personally, internally, right? But the one thing I will warn you about therapy is it does take time. It takes time for that therapist to figure out what's going on and to kind of understand the family dynamics and what's happening. And a lot of my clients make the mistake in the first instance where, okay, we're going to start with a therapist, and they want to go in and they want to just tell the therapist everything that they think is wrong and everything that they're seeing. Well, I think the child's struggling with transitions, and mom's saying she doesn't want to go with me, or dad's saying he doesn't want to, she doesn't want to go with me. And in reality, I think mom or dad or whatever end of the stick you're on is coaching the child to say those things. And so, therapist fix moms or fix dad or fix whoever to make this dynamic stop. And again, not the approach the therapist takes. The therapist goes, child's struggling with transitions. How do we help the child be okay with the transitions? How do we help the child feel safe and okay with going with mom? How do we make the child feel safe and okay with going with dad? Whatever that dynamic is, that's going to be the first goal. And then over time, if there is coaching and all of that, that will come out. But you have to trust the process a little bit in the first instance. And I know that can be scary, but if you resist something as simple as therapy, which the court highly values, you're going to have a mark against you right out the gate. Because if that parent files and says, child's struggling with transitions and I think they need to be in therapy, then the court's going to be like, okay, sorry you had to bring this in front of me because the other parent wouldn't agree. here's your order for therapy. I mean, they're not going to say sorry, but that's going to be kind of the thought in their head, right? Of like, really, the other parent had to waste court time, money, and energy to come in and ask for an order for therapy after the kid's struggling with transitions. Why wouldn't you just agree? That's going to kind of be the judge's mindset, and then that might stick with them, and then, that's kind of their impression of you. So you don't want that either. You want to agree to things around therapy, put your child in, and trust that the end result of that is going to be trying to help the child do this better, not deciding who's the guilty one, mom or dad. That is not the therapist role. That's not their purpose. That's not something that they will usually even give an opinion on a lot of the times. Their sole goal, if they are the child's therapist, is to help the child manage these types of situations. So, if you'd like more help understanding these types of things and navigating this process better to where you don't get yourself into this kind of hot water from resisting things that you shouldn't, you can go to divorceuniversityonline.com/VIP-coaching. There's information on that page about my group coaching programs for moms and for dads. And there's also a link where you can book a call with my staff if you are interested in my premium VIP one-on-one coaching services. Generally, those services are something I suggest for people who have a really complex case. They're dealing with domestic violence. They're dealing with child custody, investigators, child evaluators, CFI, CCI. There's all kinds of different names that this goes by. And so if you have something of that level going on, I would encourage you to maybe check into the premium VIP one-on-one coaching. All right. Thanks for joining me. I will see you guys in the next video.
We'll grow in number, fueled by them to see the horizon, turn us to thousands.